Okay, I am going to show you how I figure out the macros in a recipe. A lot of times I'll find a recipe and maybe it says it has the macros on it, and as I'm going through, I just feel like it's a little bit off. And that has a lot to do with the ingredients that I use. I'm pretty picky about the things that I buy when I'm making a recipe because I like to really watch my net carbs and my proteins and my fats. So I will get messages all the time with people asking me how to figure out how many macros are in a recipe. So I am going to show you how we do that simply by showing, whoops, let's go back, showing you how I figure it out for my double chocolate brownies. This is not a recipe that is in my cookbook, and so I thought it would be a good one to figure it out because I will need to figure it out for cookbook number 2. So here's our double chocolate brownies, and of course we have a recipe, and here is our list of ingredients. So I usually scribble this out on paper. I make like a little grid, right? Today I have it in a computer, like an Excel format to show you so that you can go back and forth and look at it. Basically, you need to break down each individual ingredient one at a time. And so the way I do that, so here you have, for example, the butter that I use. So you're going to have to look at the serving sizes on here and then look at how much your recipe uses. So my recipe uses a half a cup of butter, which is 8 tablespoons. So I'm going to go up and do the math, and I see that there are 11 grams of fat in 1 tablespoon of butter. I'm going to multiply that by 8, and I have 88 grams of fat. There's no carbs and there's no protein in there, so we don't worry about that, and I leave the column blank. Do this to every single one. So on my sweetener, if you're using this, if you're using the Lakanto granulated, if you're using whatever it is, it's kind of the same method. And I know some people count whole carbs and some people count net carbs. I count the net carb, and that is what I have after I've deducted fiber and sugar alcohol. And so there's no fat in this, there's no protein in it. I simply just go on Google and say, hey, how many teaspoons is in 2/3 of a cup? And it pops up the answer, which is 128, because if you look on here, a serving size is 1 teaspoon. So, or I'm sorry, not 128. Whatever it said, I think it was 32 or something like that. Then I multiplied that amount by the carbs that are in here. So if it was 128, here I'll just tell you really quick what it is so I don't confuse you. So when I Googled how many teaspoons were in 128 divided by 4, yeah, it was 32. So 32 teaspoons equals 2/3 cup of granulated sweetener. I multiply that by the total carbs, which is 4, and then my sugar alcohol is the same because erythritol is a sugar alcohol, and I end up with a net carb of 0. My eggs do not have carbs. I know that there's some apps that say eggs have carbs. The particular ones I use do not. And so I know I'm using 3 eggs, which will give me a total of 15 grams of fat and 6 grams of protein and absolutely no carbs. The almond flour that I use, 15 grams per serving of fat. Well, I have a half a cup of almond flour, and a serving size is 1/4 cup. So I'm going to multiply that by 2, 30 grams of fat. My protein is 12, carbs are 10, but then look at my fiber. When I have 2 servings, it's going to be 6, so I end up with 4 net carbs. This is my magical baking cocoa that I love. I multiplied everything by 5.33 because that's how many tablespoons are in a 1/3 cup, and 1 serving size is 1 tablespoon. So this is what I get. Notice something here and why I like this cocoa powder so much. There is more fiber in it than there are carbs. So when I deduct the fiber from the carbs, I get negative 5.3 net carbs, which helps make up for some of the other carbs in the recipe. So really read your labels, because the ones that have more carbs in them typically have additives and stuff like that added to them that are upping your carbs. Read your labels. It makes a big difference on what you're making. Okay, this is one of the different beef gelatins. This happens to be the one in my cupboard right now, so this is the one I used as an example. 2 tablespoons is a serving, and we're only using 1 tablespoon in here. So I basically took my number there and divided it in half. So the only macro I had to fill in on here was the protein, and I divided it in half, so it was 4.5 grams of protein. Lily's chocolate chips. Okay, I know for a fact that there's a cup and a half of chocolate chips in one bag. That gets tricky when you're trying to measure it out by the cup, but if you'll notice up there in the serving size, it says 14 grams. That's not as hard if you have a scale. And so what I did is I measured how much weight in grams a third cup of chocolate chips was, and it happens to be 4 servings. So then I just multiplied everything by 4, and that's how I got my answer here. So the fat's 18, protein's 4, full carbs is 36, but when I deduct the carbohydrates and the fiber and the erythritol, or I'm sorry, when I deduct the fiber and the erythritol, I get 8 net carbs. Okay, and then I have ingredients that just don't have a macro value. Some people's vanilla does, so check your vanilla. Mine does not. And then we have all of these. So this is what it looks like in my columns, right? And now I am going to go through on the fat, the protein, and the net carb, and I'm going to add those up. And that's what I get. And that's total grams of each one. So in this entire recipe, we have 153.67 fat grams, 43.83 protein grams, and 6.67 net carbs. Step by step, it's not too hard, but it can seem overwhelming to do this at first. So the next thing we want to do is take each of those individual grams from each column there and multiply it times its calorie value. So fat is 9 calories, protein and net carbs are 4 calories. And when we do that, we're going to get these totals. And that is what your calories are for the entire recipe. You'll notice in the little blue circle up on the right side. So if I am making an 8 by 8 inch pan and I'm cutting it into 16 brownies, each brownie is 99 calories, basically 99.08 calories. Now, I'm not a huge calorie counter. I do try and stay in my macros, but the reason you need to figure out calories on recipes is so that you can figure out the percentage of fat, protein, and net carb. So I am going to take that total number, 1585.2, and divide it into each of the individual macros. So see how I've divided each one by that, because they're all a component that make up that calorie count. And that is going to give us the percentage of what each one is. So this brownie is 87% fat, 11% protein, and 2% net carb, which is awesome for a keto diet. There's also, if you want to know the grams, so say you have an app and you're trying to track how many, okay, I just ate 2 brownies. I need to know what my macros were on that. We're just going to go back to those original grams, and you're going to divide it by how many servings you've put in. So a 2 by 2 inch brownies and an 8 by 8 inch pan, I'm going to divide, I would get 16 brownies. So I'm going to divide 16 into each one, and there's your count. So I would have 9.61 grams of fat per brownie, protein 2.74, and 0.42 net carbs. Now, say you took an 8 inch pan and you were feeling like, hey, I really want a brownie. Instead of dividing the number by 16, you cut it into 4 by 4 inch brownies. So you would divide the number 153.7 by 4, and that would give you your fat grams, and vice versa. So hopefully that makes sense. When people have the macros, and in my cookbook, Make It Keto, when I have the macros in there, it's based off of the amount that it makes. So if the macros are, hey, you're going to get this many grams, and then you eat 3 of them, you need to multiply what you've eaten by 3 to get the actual grams of where you're at. So the total macros per brownie are right here. I'm pretty sure they were 90 or 99 calories. I can't remember. I need to put that on this page too. But your fat, 9.61 grams. The percentage doesn't change no matter how big or small you cut it. Your protein's 2.74 and your net carb is 0.42. You can use this formula with any recipe. What I would do is, if this was the brownie recipe I was making every time, I would go into my app and I would manually input it and save it so that the next time I go to have a brownie, it's already saved in there and I don't have to worry about it. Hopefully this answers any questions you might have. Feel free to message me and ask me any other questions. I kind of picked a recipe that had more ingredients in it because I wanted you to see that you could do this and break it down. And if this is too big of a pain and you don't want to do it, then just buy cookbooks that have the macros figured out. You're going to be pretty close with your ingredients that you use. I'm just kind of an exacto, and I like to have it right where I know what's going in and out of my body. But hopefully this will help you. Thank you. And here's your recipe. So if you're interested in making this specific recipe, you've got it. And I will leave it up here for a minute so you can screenshot that.